Imagine this. The world watching as one of the most contentious territories on the globe, Israel's West Bank, faces yet another chapter in its long history. The Trump administration's stance on Israel's annexation of the West Bank sent shockwaves around the globe. But what does this mean for international diplomacy, the people of the region, and the future of peace? Today we break it all down, exploring the consequences of this policy and the reactions from all corners of the world. Stay tuned as we dive into the complex web of politics, history, and global reactions, and trust me, the story doesn't end where you think it will. The Trump administration's shift in policy regarding Israel's annexation of parts of the West Bank was a seismic moment in global politics. To many, it seemed like a victory for Israel's right to expand, a bold move signaling strength. But to others, it represented a dangerous gamble, pushing the already fragile peace process to the brink of collapse. So, how did we get here? Let's rewind a bit. In 2019, the Trump administration unveiled its so-called Peace to Prosperity plan, which gave Israel a green light to annex large parts of the West Bank. This move was revolutionary and controversial, breaking away from decades of US policy aimed at achieving a two-state solution. But was this really a peace plan or a declaration of war? Some argued that this new stance undermined decades of diplomacy. And here's where it gets interesting. Could the US government's boldness help or hinder Israel's goals in the long run? With the announcement, the world reacted swiftly and decisively. While Israel celebrated, many neighboring countries, along with the United Nations, condemned the move. The European Union took a firm stance, saying they would not recognize any Israeli sovereignty over the West Bank, further complicating matters. But wait, what about the Arab world? While many Arab nations were vocal in their disapproval, some were more muted, leading to a startling shift in dynamics. Could this moment be the catalyst for a new alliance in the Middle East, a historic shift that may surprise you? We also can't forget the Palestinians. For them, this was a devastating blow to their hopes for an independent state. With Israel moving ahead with annexation, would they accept a deal for peace? Or would they turn to more radical solutions? As these events unfolded, there were moments of tension between Israel's government and its key allies. The US wasn't alone in its support for Israel, but how far would other countries go to back up the Trump administration's bold stance? Now, hold on a second. Are we sure this is just about politics? Because it's easy to get lost in the maze of alliances and opposition. But let's zoom in for a second. How do the people on the ground in the West Bank feel? The everyday families, children, and individuals affected by these policies. The human side of this story is often overlooked in favor of political rhetoric. Let's pause here and look at the real people behind the headlines. The fallout from the Trump administration's position on the West Bank has been far-reaching. But let's dive into the consequences that aren't always covered in the headlines. For one, the US found itself increasingly isolated from some of its traditional allies. Countries like France and Germany were critical, accusing the US of destabilizing the region. The future of the Middle East peace process looked grimmer by the day. But here's the twist. Could this isolation actually strengthen US influence elsewhere? Could America's stance open doors to new alliances with countries that have historically been sidelined? The answer might surprise you, but there's something even more interesting at play: the long-term impact of this decision on future US administrations. What happens if a future president, say someone like Joe Biden, decides to reverse this policy? Will the damage be irreversible, or could a new approach bring hope for peace? And what about the Trump administration itself? How will history view its approach to Israel and Palestine? Was it a bold vision or a reckless gamble that jeopardized the peace process? Before we wrap up, there's one final question that looms large. What's next? With the Trump administration's policy leaving the Middle East in a state of uncertainty, who will step in to take charge of the peace process? Could the US finally pivot toward a more balanced approach, or will we see an even deeper entrenchment in this contentious issue? Stay with us as we explore this in more detail in future videos. The story of Israel and Palestine is far from over, and the global implications are still unfolding. If you're fascinated by the US role in shaping global affairs, don't miss out on our other videos, including a deep dive into the latest US political dynamics and their impact on the world. Head over to our USA News playlist, where we break down the most important political stories you need to know. Make sure to subscribe and click that notification bell so you never miss an update on the latest international news. See you there. Gap 2S. Before we finish, let's talk about the history of the West Bank and why it's important. The West Bank, a landlocked area near the Mediterranean coast in Western Asia, has been a big part of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict for many years. Gap 2S. A long time ago, many different groups of people lived in this area, from the ancient Canaanites to the Ottoman Empire. After World War II, the United Nations suggested splitting the land, which led to a war between Israel and Arab countries in 1948. Israel took control of the West Bank during another war in 1967, and since then, figuring out who should control it has been a difficult problem. Gap 2S. The West Bank isn't just about land. It's also important to Jewish, Christian, and Muslim people for religious and cultural reasons. Places like Hebron, Bethlehem, and Jerusalem have a lot of important history and spiritual meaning, so Gap 2S. Knowing the history of the West Bank helps us understand why things are so complicated there today and why it's been so hard to find peace. Gap 2S. If you want to learn more about history and how it affects the world today, check out our history playlist, subscribe to our channel, click the notification bell, and you'll know when we post new videos. Thank you for watching. Gap 2S. Now that we understand the historical context, let's delve into the political implications of Trump's stance on the West Bank. Gap 2S. When Trump recognized Israeli sovereignty over parts of the West Bank, it was seen as a significant shift in US foreign policy. Gap 2S. This move was applauded by some as a step towards solidifying Israel's security and sovereignty. Gap 2S. However, it also drew criticism from others who viewed it as a setback for the peace process and a violation of international law. Gap 2S. This decision has the potential to alter the dynamics of Middle Eastern politics. Gap 2S. For Israel, it could mean more support from the United States in its territorial claims, potentially encouraging other countries to follow suit. Gap 2S. On the other hand, for Palestinians, it represents a deepening of the occupation and a blow to their aspirations for statehood. Gap 2S. Internationally, Trump's move has led to a range of reactions. Gap 2S. While some countries have shown support, others have condemned the action, arguing that it undermines efforts for a two-state solution. Gap 2S. The United Nations and the European Union in particular have reiterated their stance that the West Bank is occupied territory and that any changes to its status should come through negotiations, not unilateral actions. Gap 2S. This policy shift also affects the broader geopolitical landscape. Gap 2S. It could influence US relations with other Middle Eastern nations, potentially leading to new alliances or deepening existing tensions. Gap 2S. Furthermore, it might impact America's standing in the international community as it navigates the complex web of global diplomacy. Gap 2S. Understanding these political implications is crucial for anyone interested in the future of the Middle East and international relations. Gap 2S. It highlights how historical contexts, political decisions, and global reactions are intricately connected, shaping the world we live in today. Gap 2S. If you found this analysis insightful, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel for more deep dives into global politics and history. Gap 2S. Thank you for watching, and see you in the next video. Gap 2S. To gain a deeper understanding of the potential outcomes of Trump's policy on the West Bank, we turn to several experts in international relations and Middle Eastern politics. Gap 2S. Dr. Anjali Sharma, a renowned political analyst, shares her perspective on the long-term implications. This policy could lead to a more entrenched conflict in the region. The Palestinians might feel more marginalized, which could fuel further unrest and violence. Conversely, it might also push them towards seeking new diplomatic channels to assert their claims. Gap 2S. Professor Rajiv Kapoor, an expert in US foreign policy, adds the U.S. quote, "S decision to recognize Israeli sovereignty over parts of the West Bank marks a significant departure from previous administration stances. This could set a precedent for future US foreign policy decisions, potentially influencing how America approaches other territorial disputes around the world." Gap 2SS. Dr. Fatima Hassan, a Middle East historian, offers a historical perspective. The West Bank has always been a contentious area with deep historical and cultural significance for both Israelis and Palestinians. This policy might be seen as an attempt to rewrite that history, which could have far-reaching consequences for both communities. Gap 2S. Finally, we hear from Ahmed Khan, a former diplomat, who highlights the international ramifications. This move has already strained US relations with some of its traditional allies in Europe and the Middle East. It will be interesting to see how these diplomatic relationships evolve and whether new alliances will be formed in response to this policy shift. Gap 2S. These expert opinions underscore the complexity and far-reaching impacts of Trump's stance on the West Bank. Gap 2S. It is clear that the implications of this policy are multifaceted, affecting not only the immediate region but also the broader international community. Gap 2S. As we continue to monitor the developments, it is essential to consider these expert insights to fully grasp the potential outcomes. Gap 2S. Thank you for joining us in this comprehensive analysis. Gap 2S. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel for more in-depth explorations of global issues. Gap 2S. See you in the next video. Gap 2S. As we dive deeper into the ramifications of Trump's policy on the West Bank, it is crucial to understand the global reactions from various countries and their leaders. Gap 2S. The international community's response has been diverse, reflecting the complex geopolitical landscape. Gap 2S. Gap 2S. In Europe, German Chancellor Angela Merkel expressed serious concerns over the potential destabilization of the region. We believe that unilateral actions can undermine the peace process. It is essential to return to negotiations based on international law. Gap 2S. Similarly, French President Emmanuel Macron called the policy a grave mistake that could jeopardize the prospects for a two-state solution. Gap 2S. Gap 2S. Meanwhile, in the Middle East, reactions have been even more pronounced. Gap 2S. Jordan's King Abdullah II warned that the move could lead to massive conflict and called for a united Arab response to counteract the policy. Gap 2S. Saudi Arabia's crown. Prince Mohammed bin Salman also voiced his opposition, stating that the policy might escalate tensions and hinder peace efforts. Gap 2S. Gap 2S. On the other hand, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu welcomed the decision, viewing it as a historic step towards securing Israel's borders. Gap 2S. This policy acknowledges the reality on the ground and supports Israel's right to self-defense, he remarked. Gap 2S. Gap 2S. In Asia, India's Ministry of External Affairs issued a cautious statement emphasizing the need for dialogue and a peaceful resolution to the conflict. Gap 2S. China, through its foreign ministry spokesperson, criticized the policy, highlighting the importance of adhering to United Nations resolutions. Gap 2S. Gap 2S. These varied reactions underscore the global significance of Trump's policy on the West Bank. Gap 2S. Each country's stance is shaped by its own geopolitical interests and historical ties to the region. Gap 2S. As the situation continues to evolve, the international community's role in shaping the future of the West Bank will be pivotal. Gap 2S. Gap 2S. Thank you for joining us in this comprehensive analysis. Gap 2S. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel for more in-depth explorations of global issues. Gap 2S. See you in the next video. Gap 2S. As we continue to dissect the multifaceted implications of Trump's policy on the West Bank, it is crucial to examine the economic impact on the region. Gap 2S. The West Bank, already a region marked by economic challenges, faces heightened uncertainty as a result of this policy shift. Gap 2S. The potential annexation of parts of the West Bank by Israel could disrupt the fragile economic balance, affecting both Palestinian and Israeli communities. Gap 2S. For Palestinians, the policy could mean restricted access to key agricultural lands, water resources, and trade routes. Gap 2S. The Palestinian Authority has warned that such actions could lead to a significant economic downturn, exacerbating unemployment and poverty rates. Gap 2ES. On the Israeli side, while there might be short-term gains from increased control over territories, the long-term economic implications could be more complex. Gap 2S. The cost of security, potential sanctions, and the impact on international trade relationships could weigh heavily on Israel's economy. Gap 2S. International donors and investors are also closely monitoring the situation. Gap 2S, uncertainty and instability could deter foreign investments, which are crucial for economic growth in the region. Gap 2S, moreover, the policy could impact international aid flows. Gap 2S, many countries and organizations might reconsider their financial support depending on how the situation evolves. Gap 2S, in summary, while the immediate political ramifications are evident, the long-term economic consequences of Trump's policy on the West Bank remain uncertain but potentially far-reaching. Gap 2S. As we continue to watch the developments, it is essential to consider not just the political but also the economic dimensions of this significant policy shift. Gap 2S. Thank you for joining us in this comprehensive analysis. Gap 2S. Don't forget to like, share and subscribe to our channel for more in-depth explorations of global issues. Gap 2S, see you in the next video. Gap 2S, beyond the political and economic ramifications, it is crucial to delve into the social and cultural consequences of Trump's policy on the West Bank. Gap 2S, the West Bank is not just a geopolitical entity, it is a region steeped in history, culture and human stories. Gap 2S, the potential annexation could lead to significant social upheaval affecting the everyday lives of people on both sides of the divide. Gap 2S. For many Palestinians, the policy threatens their very identity and cultural heritage. Gap 2S. Historic sites, religious landmarks and community spaces could fall under new jurisdiction, altering the cultural landscape irreversibly. Gap 2S. Families might find themselves separated by new borders and communities could face increased restrictions on movement. Gap 2S. This could lead to a loss of social cohesion and a sense of dislocation among the Palestinian population. Gap 2S. On the Israeli side, the policy could also have profound social implications. Gap 2S. While some might view it as a step towards greater security and territorial integrity, others might see it as a source of increased tension and conflict. Gap 2S. The societal divide within Israel itself could widen, sparking debates and protests over the ethical and practical aspects of the policy. Gap 2S. The international community, too, is watching closely. Gap 2S. Cultural and academic exchanges, which are vital for fostering understanding and peace, might suffer as a result of heightened tensions. Gap 2S. Artists, scholars and activists from around the world have already voiced their concerns, highlighting the need for preserving the cultural and social fabric of the region. Gap 2S. In essence, the social and cultural consequences of the policy are as significant as the political and economic ones. Gap 2S. They touch the very core of human experience, affecting how people live, interact and perceive their place in the world. Gap 2S. As we continue to monitor the situation, it is essential to keep these human stories at the forefront of our analysis. Gap 2S, thank you for joining us in this comprehensive exploration. Gap 2S, don't forget to like, share and subscribe to our channel for more in-depth analyses of global issues. Gap 2S, see you in the next video. Gap 2S, the media plays a pivotal role in shaping public perception and understanding of complex geopolitical issues. Gap 2S. When it comes to Trump's policy on the West Bank, media coverage has been diverse and, at times, polarizing. Gap 2S. Leading news outlets from around the world have taken varied stances, reflecting their editorial policies and audience expectations. Gap 2S. Gap 2S. In the United States, mainstream media like CNN, the New York Times and Fox News have covered the policy extensively, but with differing tones and angles. Gap 2S. While some outlets focus on the potential benefits of the policy for Israel's security, others highlight the humanitarian and legal concerns raised by international bodies. Gap 2S. Gap 2S. In Europe, the media landscape offers a mix of critical and supportive voices. Gap 2S. British newspapers like The Guardian and The Times have provided in-depth analyses, often criticizing the policy for its potential to disrupt peace efforts. Gap 2S. Meanwhile, some continental European media have echoed similar sentiments, urging caution and dialogue. Gap 2S. Gap 2S. Middle Eastern media, particularly in countries like Jordan, Egypt and Qatar, have been vocal in their condemnation of the policy. Gap 2S. Al Jazeera, for instance, has focused on the adverse effects on Palestinian communities, bringing personal stories to the forefront. Gap 2S. Gap 2S. Social media platforms have also become battlegrounds for public opinion. Gap 2S, Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram are flooded with posts, hashtags, and debates reflecting the global interest and concern. Gap 2S, influencers, activists, and ordinary citizens from both sides of the conflict and beyond have shared their perspectives, adding layers to the narrative. Gap 2S. It is important to note that media coverage can sometimes be influenced by political affiliations, funding sources, and national interests. Gap 2S. This underscores the need for critical consumption of news, encouraging audiences to seek information from multiple sources to form a well-rounded understanding. Gap 2S. As we navigate through these media narratives, it becomes clear that the issue is not just a local or regional concern, but a global one. Gap 2S. The way the media frames this policy will undoubtedly impact public opinion and potentially policy decisions in various parts of the world. Gap 2S. Thank you for joining us in this comprehensive exploration. Gap 2S. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel for more in-depth analyses of global issues. Gap 2S. See you in the next video. Gap 2S. As we wrap up this in-depth exploration of Trump's policy on the West Bank, let's summarize the key points we've covered. Gap 2S. We began by unveiling the policy itself, understanding its core tenets and the motivations behind it. Gap 2S, the global stage reacted with a mix of support and criticism, reflecting the complex geopolitical dynamics at play. Gap 2S. We then examined the immediate fallout and the broader consequences of the policy, both locally and internationally. Gap 2S, from political implications to economic impacts, the ripple effects of this stance are far-reaching. Gap 2S. We also delved into the historical context of the West Bank, providing a backdrop to understand the significance of this region. Gap 2S. Expert opinions shed light on potential outcomes, offering a range of perspectives on what the future might hold. Gap 2S. We heard voices from around the world, capturing a diverse array of reactions and sentiments. Gap 2S. The economic and social consequences of the policy were scrutinized, revealing a region in flux and the deep cultural implications of these changes. Gap 2S. Media coverage played a pivotal role in shaping public perception, with different outlets presenting varying narratives. Gap 2S. The role of social media in amplifying these discussions was also highlighted, showing how digital platforms have become arenas for global debate. Gap 2S. In conclusion, Trump's policy on the West Bank is a multifaceted issue that continues to evolve. Gap 2S. It serves as a reminder of the intricate interplay between politics, history, and media in shaping our world. Gap 2S. As informed global citizens, it is crucial to approach such topics with a critical mind, seeking diverse sources and perspectives. Gap 2S. Thank you for joining us on this journey. Gap 2S. We hope this analysis has provided you with a deeper understanding of the complexities involved. Gap 2S. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel for more comprehensive explorations of global issues. Gap 2S. See you in the next video. Gap 2S. Before we conclude, it's essential to place Trump's policy within the broader historical context of U.S. foreign policy in the Middle East. Gap 2S. The United States has long been a key player in this region, with its involvement dating back to the mid-20th century. Gap 2S. From the Cold War era, where the US aimed to counter Soviet influence, to the strategic alliances with key nations like Israel and Saudi Arabia, American policy has been driven by a mix of geopolitical, economic, and ideological factors. Gap 2S. The US's role in the Middle East has seen various phases, from the support of regimes that align with its interests to military interventions in Iraq and Afghanistan, and diplomatic efforts like the Camp David Accords and the Iran nuclear deal. Gap 2S. Each administration has brought its own approach, yet the underlying objectives have often revolved around securing energy resources, maintaining regional stability, and countering terrorism. Gap 2S. Trump's stance on the West Bank is part of this continuum, reflecting his administration's broader Middle Eastern policy, which includes recognizing Jerusalem as Israel's capital and withdrawing from the Iran nuclear deal. Gap 2S. These moves have been both praised and criticized, showcasing the enduring complexity and volatility of U.S. involvement in the region. Gap 2S. Understanding this historical backdrop is crucial for a comprehensive analysis of any current policy. Gap 2S. It allows us to see not just the immediate implications, but also the long-term trends and patterns that shape the region's geopolitics. Gap 2S. As always, history provides valuable lessons and context for interpreting today's decisions and their future ramifications. Gap 2S. Gap 2S. Thank you for staying with us through this additional exploration. Gap 2S. We hope this historical perspective enriches your understanding of the topic. Gap 2S. Remember to like, share, and subscribe to our channel for more insightful analysis. Gap 2S. Until next time, Gap 2S. As we delve deeper, it's crucial to examine how Trump's policy on the West Bank has impacted US-Israel relations. Gap 2S. Historically, the bond between the United States and Israel has been one of the most robust alliances in international politics. Gap 2S. From military aid to diplomatic support, the US has been a staunch ally of Israel, often acting as its protector on the global stage. Gap 2S. Trump's administration took this relationship to new heights, with several unprecedented moves that solidified this alliance. Gap 2S. Recognizing Jerusalem as Israel's capital and moving the US embassy there was a significant step that underscored this bond. Gap 2ES. The endorsement of Israeli sovereignty over the Golan Heights further cemented the US's unwavering support. Gap 2S. However, the policy on the West Bank took this to an even more controversial level. Gap 2S. By backing Israel's annexation plans, Trump's administration diverged from decades of US policy that advocated for a two-state solution. Gap 2S. This shift has had profound implications. Gap 2S. On one hand, it has strengthened the right-wing factions within Israel, emboldening their stance and policies. Gap 2S. On the other hand, it has strained relations with Palestinian authorities and other Middle Eastern nations that view the annexation as a violation of international law. Gap 2S. For the US, this policy has been a double-edged sword. Gap 2S. While it has deepened ties with Israel's current leadership, it has also alienated key Arab allies and complicated America's role as a mediator in the peace process. Gap 2S. The long-term impact on US-Israel relations will depend on future administrations and their approach to Middle Eastern diplomacy. Gap 2S. As we navigate these complex dynamics, it becomes evident that Trump's policy on the West Bank is not just a regional issue, but a critical factor in the broader narrative of US-Israel relations. Gap 2S. Understanding this is key to comprehending the current and future geopolitical landscape of the Middle East. Gap 2S. Thank you for watching. Gap 2S. Please like, share, and subscribe for more in-depth analyses. Gap 2S. Until next time, Gap 2S. Gap 2S. As we continue to unravel the complexities of Trump's policy on the West Bank, it is essential to turn our attention to the reactions from various political analysts. Gap 2S. These experts offer a range of perspectives that help us better understand the broader implications of this controversial move. Gap 2S. Many analysts see Trump's policy as a bold but risky gamble. Gap 2S. According to Dr. Anjali Sharma, a renowned Middle East expert, this move has undoubtedly solidified US-Israel relations in the short term, but it has also set a precedent that could lead to further instability in the region. Gap 2S. On the other hand, political commentator Rajesh Menon argues, Trump's stance on the West Bank has exposed the deep divisions within the international community. Gap 2S. While some applaud the assertiveness, others see it as a dangerous departure from established norms. Gap 2S. Analyst Nisha Gupta highlights the economic ramifications, stating the policy has the potential to shift economic alliances and trade routes, affecting not just the Middle East, but global markets. Gap 2S. Furthermore, Professor Arvind Kumar emphasizes the social and cultural consequences, noting, this move has intensified feelings of disenfranchisement among Palestinians, which could lead to increased unrest and a resurgence of conflict. Gap 2S. These diverse viewpoints underscore the multifaceted impact of Trump's policy on the West Bank. Gap 2S. By considering these expert opinions, we gain a more nuanced understanding of the geopolitical chessboard and the potential outcomes that lie ahead. Gap 2S. As we conclude this segment, it is clear that the reactions from political analysts are as varied as they are insightful. Gap 2S. Their expertise helps us navigate the intricate web of international relations and foresee the challenges and opportunities that may arise. Gap 2S. Thank you for watching. Gap 2S. Please like, share, and subscribe for more in-depth analyses. Gap2S. Until next time, Gap2S. As we delve deeper into the ramifications of Trump's policy on the West Bank, it is imperative to consider the potential long-term consequences. This policy shift, while creating immediate ripples, sets the stage for profound changes that could reshape the geopolitical landscape for years to come. First, the policy could lead to a realignment of regional alliances. Countries like Saudi Arabia and Egypt, traditionally US allies, may reconsider their positions, potentially seeking new partnerships to counterbalance the perceived bias towards Israel. This realignment could alter the dynamics of power and influence in the Middle East. Secondly, the policy's impact on the Israeli-Palestinian conflict cannot be overstated. By supporting Israeli claims over the West Bank, the US has effectively sidelined Palestinian aspirations for statehood. This could lead to a prolonged period of unrest and violence, further complicating any future peace negotiations. Economically, the policy could disrupt trade routes and investment flows. Middle Eastern economies, already volatile, may experience increased uncertainty affecting global markets. Investors might become wary, leading to shifts in economic strategies and partnerships. On the social front, the policy could exacerbate divisions within societies. Feelings of disenfranchisement and injustice among Palestinians could fuel radicalization and extremism, posing security threats not just regionally but globally. Moreover, the policy could set a precedent in international law. By endorsing unilateral territorial claims, it challenges the established norms of sovereignty and self-determination, potentially encouraging similar moves by other nations, leading to a more fragmented and contentious international order. In conclusion, while Trump's policy on the West Bank may have been intended to solidify alliances and assert US influence, its long-term consequences are far-reaching and complex. The geopolitical, economic, social, and legal impacts will continue to unfold, shaping the future of the Middle East and beyond. Thank you for joining us in this exploration of a pivotal moment in international relations. For more insights and analyses, please like, share, and subscribe. Until next time, stay informed and engaged.